we awake? Isn't that awesome seeing all just the way phases of life happen? It's so cool. Imagine next year you could be up here from graduating from the Well Ministry College. That's what I'm saying. And so you want to come to that informational meeting because you too can be up here graduating from the Well Ministry College. Yeah, super excited. I get a little emotional, especially with like Alexis, because she was in our youth group so many years ago, and she is way smarter than everyone in this room except for maybe one or two of us. But man, and Jackson, that was the cutest thing in the world. Anyway, so we're finishing our series Into the Pit today, and I'm excited that I get to be back here today. Last week, Allie spoke. Didn't she do an incredible job? So can we give her a round of applause? I know she already left, but man, I love listening to the podcast when I'm gone, and I get to hear the things that God is teaching while we're gone. Shane sent a picture of during worship, during first service, and said, man, God is doing something powerful in here. And I go, oh, that's so awesome. Wait, it's because I'm not there? That's just a peek into the insecurities of a pastor. But no, it was really awesome to see just the incredible gifts and the things that God is doing and teaching. I was a little upset with Allie after I listened because I'm like, you just took my entire part 4 of Into the Pit. Went to Daniel, of course. That's like a fast forward story. But it was really awesome. So if you missed it, make sure that you take a listen to what she spoke on. This one's different. This message Into the Pit, we're talking about, the title of the message is Reconciling Relationships. So if you want to leave now, the doors have been locked. You can't get out. This one's hard. I know even studying and preparing for it, it's hard for me because I can look back in my life and see where different relationships, they hurt me. They whether did things or they said things or they neglected things. And for me, I'm a third born, so I want to protect. And so there have been times in my life where I have shut things down because of a relationship hurt me. And so now we're talking about what it means to reconcile relationships, and it gets really difficult really fast. And so looking at Joseph's story, we get to the part where he is now face to face with the people that threw him into a pit, that sold him into slavery, that rejected him, threw him out. Now, not only is he face to face with these people that did it, and his hands are tied behind his back, he can't do anything, kind of like Daniel's situation, he didn't get to choose the judgment of those who betrayed him, right? The king did. Joseph is standing there before his brothers, and he has the opportunity to execute them, to remove them, to sell them into slavery, to throw them into pits, to take advantage of them. And there's a wrestling that begins to take place. And I don't know about you, but if you've ever been in a place, in a relationship where you had an opportunity to get even, come on, how many of us can say that tasted good? Like just the aurora of that was like, oh man, here we go. Like you have that thing, like I used to, this is a terrible thing to say, but you know when people, you say, if I saw them broken down on the side of the road, I probably wouldn't pull over and help them out. Okay, but I would go, if I saw them on the side of the road, I wouldn't mind swerving toward their direction. Okay, just to scare them, I promise. But there's this kind of this feeling, and depending on what the hurt is, you almost feel justified. You're going to give them what they deserve. You're going to make them pay. You're going to make them feel what you felt. You're going to stick it to them. You're going to make them suffer like you suffer. Am I the only one that's in the room that have ever had these thoughts or feelings? I had a guy in front of me at Chick-fil-A yesterday. One, he's driving a really wimpy car, but whatever. But he's got a corgi sticker on it. So I'm sorry if this is you. I was totally being judgmental. I don't know what it was, but that corgi sticker just stared back at me like it was like mocking me because he took forever ordering his food. And I'm just like, I'm just trying to get food for my wife. But there was like really evil thoughts that happened between me and the corgi dog car. At Chick-fil-A, so I felt super convicted because that's where the Holy Spirit resides. There's the Temple of Jerusalem in every Chick-fil-A on the West Coast. Not so much the East Coast, but anyway. And so we kind of have been walking through Joseph's journey. We have to recognize that and understand that what was meant to be used for our destruction, God is able to use for our good. And when it's used for our good, it's meant for his glory. And so we are in this place where we are talking about being in the pit, because when you're in the pit, you don't see the good, and you definitely ain't seeing the glory of God, because you're in the pit. You're in this surrounding place. So we looked at what role each of us have to play in the pit. We looked at the dysfunctional family that Joseph grew up in. We looked at the pits of temptation and success when Joseph was faced with temptation to sleep with Potiphar's wife. We talked about trusting God at the bottom of the pit and how to get out intentionally. Ali spoke last week about how Joseph and Daniel's stories are very similar. And today we're talking about what it means to get out of relational pits, because the problem that you run into when we fall into pits, again, whether it be financial, relational, whatever it be, whatever the pit is, relationships suffer. And this is why. Because relationships are what make us human. It's first our relationship with God and our ability to have relationship with the people around us. That's what the enemy went after. The enemy didn't go after our intellect and said, do you believe God exists? He went after the trust between Adam and Eve and the relationship with God the Father. And so from now on, from that point of sin entering into the world, our relationships are what breaks us. And it's our relationships that are so important that we have to fight to be in a relationship with each other. Because what the enemy wants to do is isolate you. I just watched Lion King, like the new one, which was practically the old one. And you see it even in the way that they the way that they hunt is they would you can watch on National Geographic too. You don't have to watch Lion King, but they take the weakest one out of the herd and they devour that one. And that's what the enemy tries to do. He's going to try to weaken you before he devours you, and so he's going to isolate you. And so relationships are everything, and that's exactly what happened here with Joseph and his brothers and his entire family. Relationships suffer above everything else. See, when Joseph's last step out of his pit, he is now standing he is overseeing all of Egypt. The Pharaoh is kind of the figurehead at this moment. They're going through a famine through the land, 7 years of abundance and then 7 years of famine. So they saved the abundance, prepared for the famine. And so now the country of Egypt's in a pit. And in this pit, now Joseph's family is having to come in and ask for food. And so in this moment, we'll read it here in a little bit, when Joseph sees his family, he has an opportunity for redemption or revenge. He has an opportunity for reconciliation or retribution. So it's the very first time that Joseph is forced to face the exact thing that put him in the place where he is now. He spent his entire 20s, an entire decade, in slavery and then subject to somebody else. But this is what's neat about Joseph's story when we pan out. Joseph's story is not just about Joseph. Joseph's story is not even just about his brothers. Joseph's story isn't even about Egypt. It's about the family that God chooses to embody his glory, to in turn show to the rest of the world. So if you have a dysfunctional family, there's hope. I'm glad that spoke to one person. That's great. If you have a dysfunctional family, there's hope. God did not choose the nation of Israel because they were a great family or a great nation. They weren't a nation. He chose them because he had his grace upon them, not because they were anything special. They didn't become special until God put their hand on them. God has put his hand on each and every one of you. And because of that, we have an opportunity to seek after the things of him, to get out of isolation, to pursue reconciliation. I love the prophetic word that was given during our pre-service prayer today. It was this, is God is faithful from beginning to end. God is faithful from beginning to end. So if you're in the middle right now, trust that God will be faithful from beginning to end. He is the Alpha and the Omega. He is faithful. And so Joseph teaches this in a raw and emotionally charged example of what reconciliation looks like. So number one, write this down. Reconciliation requires restraint. Reconciliation requires restraint. And when we talk about reconciliation in general, we're going to look at the story of Joseph, obviously. But consider are the relationships you have with loved ones, or maybe ex-loved ones. Consider reconciliation with family. Consider reconciliation within communities. Consider reconciliation amongst ethnic groups. Consider reconciliation amongst the body of the church, where there has been infighting instead of edification, where there has been tearing down instead of building up. Because we have a lot of work to do in order to repair the damage that has been done through decades and centuries of the church fighting the church. And that's why people don't like the church, by the way. It has nothing to do with the theology. It's because the people in it don't know how to have reconciled relationships. It's because we go after revenge, we go after retribution, we go after just stupid things to try to make us feel better. So can we really hone in when we talk about reconciliation? Can we make a commitment within our hearts to actually hear it, not just with our minds, but with our hearts, and then ask God to change us, to transform us? Because without that transformation, you're just going to hear words are going to go one ear out the other. The whole point of this message is for change, for reconciliation. So again, number one, reconciliation. Reconciliation, it was harder for me to spell than say, so you can imagine, requires restraint. In Genesis chapter 42, we were going to catch up here with Joseph. It says, since Joseph was governor of all of Egypt, starting here in verse 6, and in charge of selling grain to all the people, it was to him that his brothers came. When they arrived, they bowed before him with their faces to the ground. And that calls back to the prophetic word that God gave Joseph in the prophetic dreams, that his brothers would come and bow before him. Joseph recognized his brothers instantly, but he pretended to be a stranger and spoke harshly to them. Where are you from, he demanded. From the land of Canaan, they replied, we have come to buy food. Although Joseph recognized his brothers, they didn't recognize him. He remembered the dreams he had about them many years before. He said to them, you are spies. You have come to see how vulnerable the land has become. No, my lord, they exclaimed. Your servants have simply come to buy food. We are all brothers, members of the same family. We are honest men, sir. So it's already a small confrontation. Now, the people that sold him into slavery have claimed that they are honest men. Have you ever had that opportunity, you're in an argument, and they say that one thing, and you pause? And you, symbolically rustle up your sleeves, stretch out, and you're just ready to bring it? You're ready to bring that emotional, attack that you know is just going to hit that button? You know you're going to bring up that thing that you're not supposed to bring up because it's coming down now, okay? Here we go. We are not spies. Yes, you are. You have come to see how vulnerable our land has become. Sir, they said, there are actually 12 of us. We have our servants and all of our brothers, sons of many of man living in the land of Canaan. Our youngest brother is back there with our father right now, and one of our brothers is no longer with us. First, he brings up a brother he didn't know about. And then they bring him up. But Joseph insisted, as I said, you are spies. This is how I'm going to test your story. I swear by the life of Pharaoh that you will never leave Egypt unless your youngest brother comes here. One of you must go and get your brother. I'll keep the rest of you here in prison, because this brother he didn't know about is the only brother that has not hurt him. He likes this guy already. It turns out that you don't have a younger brother. I will know that you are spies. So Joseph put them all in prison for 3 days. I wish I could have done that. You know what we do? We don't put the people that hurt us in prison. What we do is we just ignore them. We cut relationship, which is one of the most painful things you can do to somebody, because we're all created to be in what? Relationship. So when you cut a relationship, especially without their permission, damage to the soul has been done. So we don't maybe not put them in literal prison. If you do, please contact the authorities and let us know where they are. But a lot of times we do it emotionally. We cut them off. We put them aside. We don't invite them to certain things. We leave them out of group texts. We silence them on social media. We make sure that they know where they belong. On the third day, Joseph said to them, I am a God-fearing man, for if you do as I say, you will live. If you really are honest men, choose one of your brothers to remain in prison. The rest of you may go home with the grain to your starving family. But if you bring your youngest brother back to me, this will prove that you are telling the truth. You will not die. To this they agreed. Joseph has all of the... I know, I have a lisp. That's why I know this is a graceful church, because you let me speak. Joseph has the opportunity to just say, your spies, execute them. But he serves restraint because there's a part of him that wants relationship restored. There's a part of him that recognizes that regardless, this is family. And so he wrestles with his response. Does he do the right thing? No. This is one of those things that the Bible's not prescribing, it's describing what happened. The Bible's full of imperfect people. That's good news for everyone in this room. He didn't deal with it perfectly, but what I do recognize, what I love about Joseph is he exercised restraint. It's something that Jesus talks about in Matthew 5. It says that blessed are the meek. Now, meek does not mean weak. We've talked about this a little bit. Meek means to be able to control your strength. You may have the full ability to bring your wrath, but you don't. And that's the meekness that is shown that you're able to restrain what you're able to do. Restraint does not mean that you push down feelings, that you just say, oh, it's okay. And by the way, never say it's okay. Like if someone hurts you, don't say it's okay. How about we start saying, hey, it hurt, but I'm willing to forgive you. Can we heal through this? Because when we start saying it's okay, what we do is start giving permission for people to repeat behavior. It's not okay. It's not okay to go through some of these things. Joseph has the power, but he chooses not to. There's a struggle, which leads to number 2, reconciliation requires vulnerability. Reconciliation requires a vulnerability. In verse 21, it says, speaking among themselves, they said, clearly we are being punished because of what we did to Joseph long ago. This is the brothers talking. We saw him in anguish. We pleaded for his life, but we wouldn't listen. This is why we are in this trouble. Didn't I tell you not to sin against? So we're having this conversation. His blood is on our hands. Verse 23. Of course, they didn't know that Joseph understood them, for he had been using an interpreter before to kind of hide his identity. Now Joseph turned away from them and began to weep. And when he regained his composure, he spoke to them again. Joseph feels every single ounce of pain in this moment. He does not shove it aside. He allows him to feel the weight of what's happening. His brothers are literally showing remorse in front of him. Not so much for what they did, but because they're getting in trouble in their minds because of what they did. And so Joseph has this moment where he allows himself to feel the pain. And that's what happens is when we don't allow ourselves to become vulnerable, we allow barriers, we allow our prejudices, we allow our opinions to become fact about what we think of other people. And when that begins to happen is we are beginning to limit our ability to be reconciled because we have set up these barriers, because we are so prideful and don't want to show any weakness. We fail to be vulnerable. Thus, we fail to be reconciled. One of the most beautiful things when you look at the creation account in Genesis chapter 2, it says that man and woman were naked. Some of you are like, all right, just got awkward for a little bit. What's great about this picture and this image is that there was no shame. There was no guilt. There was no desire to cover oneself because just as much as Adam saw Eve, Eve saw Adam in all of their glory. I'm just saying, can you just imagine unsinful bodies like that aren't being decayed and destroyed? Like this, Adam and Eve were probably just, like, what? Yes. Yes. Anyway. Then sin came into the world. The first thing that they did is that they felt shame and guilt toward each other, and they hid from God. What happens is that culture of vulnerability was gone. They were afraid of who God was, so they hid from him, and they were ashamed of each other, and so they began to cover one another. And that's really what began the conflict between man and woman, between human beings, is because we were no longer felt safe to be vulnerable with the other person. And that's kind of the idea of marriage, is to be able to come up and choose vulnerability once again. But we put up emotional walls, we keep lights off, we do, you name it, just to hide what we think is undesirable, whether it be your physical body or what's going on in your heart or in your mind. And a lack of vulnerability. And it's not really, if you talk about marriage counseling, you talk about friendship counseling, which they probably should have more of that, is that when you're able to just sit in front of each other and bare your soul, that's when healing begins. Nothing can begin to heal if you continue to hide the things that God wants you to expose. There is power in being vulnerable with one another. In Genesis 45, it says that Joseph could not stand it any longer. It says later on, he puts them through a series of tests and trials back and forth as he is personally wrestling what he should do. So we're skipping ahead to Genesis 45. Joseph could stand it no longer. There were many people in the room. He said to his attendants, "Out, all of you. He got rid of all the Egyptians in the room. Go. It's just him and his brothers." So he was alone with his brothers, and he told them who he was. Then he broke down and he wept. He wept so loudly that the Egyptians could hear him, and word of it quickly carried to Pharaoh's palace. He is becoming so vulnerable before his brothers to the point that he is showing weakness. This great governor of Egypt is weeping in a pool of his own tears. Most of us wouldn't get caught dead crying in front of the person that betrayed us. And here Joseph is being vulnerable. He's allowing the pain and the suffering to begin to exit his body. "Please come closer," he said to them. They came closer, and he said again, "I am Joseph, your brother whom you sold into slavery in Egypt. But don't be upset, don't be angry with yourselves for selling me to this place. It was God who sent me here ahead of you to preserve your lives." He just told them, don't be upset with yourselves. Hey, get over it, because God did this on purpose. Only a healed person can say that. Because if you've got an ounce of it still in you, this famine that has ravaged the land for 2 years will last 5 more years, and there'll be neither plowing nor harvesting. God sent me ahead of you to keep you and your families alive, to preserve many survivors. So it was God who sent me here, not you. Are you able to, when you come to the place of vulnerability, you allow not only your emotions and healing to take place, you allow the Holy Spirit to enter your broken vessel, to realize that the pain and suffering that you have gone through in the past is for God's glory and for his purposes. You may be in a pit right now that has nothing to do with you, but has everything to do with your children's future. The pit that you're in may have nothing to do with you. It's nothing that you did wrong, but God is preparing for you for something so that other people may know that God's love is true and existent. He is doing things in you that if we just begin to change our perspective, we'll begin to see that God uses all things. The broken, the disgusting, the ugly, the shameful things. He uses all things for your benefit and his glory. But some of us, we only want the benefit part. We want benefit all through our lives. Let's just live a life of benefits and God will use me. No. We have this saying amongst Aaron and I that we learned through something in our story, is that you never trust a leader without a limp. Everyone's got brokenness. And if you try to hide it, you'll just continue breaking people. But if you allow your vulnerableness to be evident, you lead through that vulnerableness, you lead your kids to your vulnerableness, you lead your families, you lead your company, you lead your organizations with vulnerableness, people will say, yeah, I want to follow that. because they're getting a real person. And number 3, reconciliation requires rebuilding. Things are destroyed when drama goes down. Relationships are destroyed, households are destroyed, and it takes rebuilding. Genesis 45, 9 through 11, it says, "Now hurry back to your father and tell him, this is what your son Joseph says. God has made me master over all of the land of Egypt. So come down to me immediately. You can live in the region of Goshen, where you can be near me with all your children and grandchildren, your flocks and your herds, everything you own." It says, "Please move into my house. I'll take care of you. I don't just have the plethora of everything we save, but I have my palace. I have my power. I will take care of you there. There are still 5 years of famine ahead of us. Otherwise, you and your household and all your animals will starve." And I want to invite the worship team forward as we go into a time of worship and go into a time of baptism. Forgiveness can happen in an instant, but building trust takes consistency. You can't forgive someone right away and then trust them right away. It doesn't work that way. Forgiveness is releasing their control over you. Trust is earned, and it is something that, again, happens over consistency. Any construction that you've ever seen done, before the foundation is ever laid, you have to break up the soil. You have to press down the soil. You have to get that ready in order to build something new. But this is what's fantastic. God will always move most freely when people decide to reconcile. There might be things where you feel like God is stuck in your life, like he's not doing anything. Meanwhile, there's like an army of people that you refuse to have a relationship with. God will move more freely in your life when you choose to be reconciled to people. Pursuing forgiveness, pursuing repentance are the things that God is about. Because he wants to. That's what the whole cross of Jesus is all about. Listen to this in 2 Corinthians. It says, "And all this is a gift from God who brought us back to himself through Christ. God has given us this task, reconciling people to him. For God was in Christ, reconciling the world to himself, no longer counting people's sins against them. He gave us this wonderful message of reconciliation." Joseph's story is merely a foreshadowing of what God does to us because we betrayed him. We put him on the cross. Yet when we come to him for needing of help because we find ourselves in a season of famine, Jesus does not say, "Be gone with you." He says, "You're welcome with me. I love you. Come into my household. Move in with me. Follow me. And I will give you blessing, and I will give you an abundant life." Though we deserve nothing, we deserve to be thrown back into our famine. But Jesus says, "Come. You're welcome here." I want to invite everyone to stand. And I want to challenge you with this last thing. I'm going to encourage you to respond. If God has spoken something to your heart, if he's spoken to your mind, I want you to physically respond. I'm going to invite you to come to the altar here, and I just want you to just focus on who Jesus is and that he has accepted you at the cross. And the reason why I want you to do this is because the more that we respond to the voice of God, the more we get to know the voice of God. See, what happens is when God speaks to us and we don't respond, it creates a callous over our heart. And the more and more we don't respond to God is the more and more that we are unable to hear him when it matters. So imagine if we created a culture within ourselves that when I hear God's voice, I respond to it. That way each response make it easier and easier for you to hear the voice of the Lord. So when you're in a situation, you say, "God, what is your will?" You go, "Oh, I recognize that voice." Because you've been practicing responding it to the small things, so it matters with the big things. So as we worship together, as we get ready for baptism, during this first song, I want to invite you, if God is speaking something to your heart, and he is asking you to respond, not even if he's asking you, I want you to respond. I want you to come to the front, and I want you to just begin praying. I want you to begin worshiping. And after the song, we're going to baptize, and we're going to do those things. But again, let's come to the front. Let's worship him. Let's respond to the things that God is speaking to us today.